Is burnout just a me problem, or is my brain literally not built to handle non-stop notifications and hustle culture? So, first of all, no, your brain is not built to handle non-stop notification. So, when you're scrolling through news about market crashings or market crashes or worrying about your financial future, your body is activating its stress response.
Create a simple wind down routine that signals to your body it's time to relax.
Our brains aren't designed to process this volume of threatening information constantly, right? So each negative headline can trigger a small stress response, and these micro stressful responses accumulate throughout the day. Our body is not designed to handle that.
How nutrition plays into stress management during this kind of uncertainty. Many people either stress eat or lose their appetite completely.
What investors are looking out for in entrepreneurs is what they call a blue flame, right? A blue flame is a person who is going to burn themselves in the most productive way so that they can be the most efficient. They don't really care what happens to you afterwards, right?
I find many clients don't realize that even mild dehydration can amplify anxiety symptoms.
Stress and chronic stress manifests in different ways for different people. Common symptoms will include difficulty in sleeping, irritability, trouble concentrating, headaches, muscle tension. So your body is releasing cortisol, adrenaline, your heart rate is increasing, and your body is basically preparing to either run away. The blue light from the screen is interfering with melatonin production. But also, if you're consuming stressful information, you're really just activating your stress response right before when you're trying to sleep.
Because knowledge and knowing is not enough. Taking action and doing something about it is the most important thing.
Welcome to SeraTalks podcast, powered by Serapath.
Welcome to our second episode of the SeraTalks podcast. My name is Dr. Vivek Narayan, a health educator and recovering physician.
And I'm Sarika, Kishore, health and wellness coach. Today we are diving into something that's affecting nearly everyone right now, managing stress and anxiety during economic turbulence.
So, with the recent introduction of tariffs and the administration flip flopping on introducing them, then pausing, reintroducing them, and then pausing them again, market volatility and fears of recession dominating the headlines, many of our listeners are experiencing heightened stress and uncertainty, especially those of you looking to build a nest egg and approaching big financial decisions.
We've been flooded with messages from listeners asking how to stay grounded when everything seems chaotic. So today we are dedicating our full 90 minutes to practical tools for navigating these challenging times.
We'll explore how chronic stress affects your mind, your body, especially during economic uncertainty and in general, rapidly changing environments, chaotic situations, and provide actionable strategies to build resilience. We're a big fan of resilience over here at Serapath Integrative.
Absolutely. And because we can't control the markets or policy decisions, what we can do is we can control how we respond to them. So let's dive in, or rather, collectively take a deep breath and focus on what we can do.
So, the first segment over here, we're going to be understanding stress, chronic stress within the context of what's happening in the human body, right? So, when you're scrolling through news about market crashings or market crashes or worrying about your financial future, your body is activating its stress response.
And that stress response affects nearly every system in our body, right?
That's right. So your body is releasing cortisol, adrenaline, your heart rate is increasing, and your body is basically preparing to either run away, what is known as flight, or to actually fight a predator. So your fight or flight response. Now, this is very useful. This is an evolutionary mechanism that we all have. It's very useful for acute stressors. So, for example, if you're being hunted or you're hunting someone, when you're running away from danger, all very useful, but it's quite problematic when this is not a stressor or a threat that you can immediately address. So in other words, when it's chronic stress, it becomes problematic.
Yeah, and isn't that the issue today? Like this economic anxiety, it's not a one time event. It's a persistent concern that can last weeks, months, or I don't know, even years.
Precisely. So, just focusing on what's happening right now, we've gone through about 3 or 4 months of, hey, do we have these trade tariffs or not? Are we, and for our audience, the listeners, Sarika and I have a unique insight. Both of us belong to a diasporic community, so we're always in touch with other people from across the globe. I'm based out of the US, Sarika is based out of Canada. US and Canada are traditionally considered to be good friends and neighbors. And right now we're in a situation where a lot of us are wondering as to what really is going on, right? So if we're looking at the science behind chronic stress in particular, really what it is it's an imbalance between the perceived demands that a human has to meet and the resources that they have to meet those demands. So let me break that down a little bit. We were confronted with a situation and our mind is basically saying, oh, do I have the energy and do I have the resources to be able to meet this particular demand and this threat? And if I don't, I perceive that as stress, acute stress, and over time it becomes chronic stress. If I do have the resources and the demands, then I actually view that as a challenge. And I then look for solutions into how I can overcome whatever I'm being exposed to. So, right now, if people are saying, well, I need to protect my retirement, how do I pay my bills if there's a recession? They feel out of control. They don't feel that they have the resources to be able to answer those questions. And hence, they have that perception and that physiological response of stress as well as chronic stress.
Yeah, that makes so much sense when you talk about you protecting your retirement or the issue with paying my bills and feeling the anxiety due to these questions. Very true. We don't know if we have resources to address the concerns. And so let's help our listeners identify if they're experiencing chronic stress from these economic concerns. What signs should we be looking for, Vivek, if we are trying to assess where we stand today?
Yeah. And it might sound strange to the listeners because I think intellectually we're able to really distinguish between, oh, we're being hunted, this is a threat versus this is just news. But neurobiologically, the brain is perceiving it as a threat and and it's manifesting as stress, right? And acute stress. So common symptoms, stress and chronic stress manifests in different ways for different people. And it's some of that's really one of the reasons why we created the program that we created. But generally speaking, common symptoms will include difficulty in sleeping, irritability, trouble concentrating, headaches, muscle tension, digestive issues, increased or decreased appetite, so a change in appetite. And then you also might notice yourself constantly checking the news or your investment accounts. And generally, when you are in a situation of uncertainty, most people then will be trying to look for information that either validates or unvalidates what it is that they're thinking. So you become completely externally oriented and you're looking around for information. And that manifests itself in picking up your phone, looking at news, scrolling, and you're just going through those articles and like, okay, is my internal belief being reinforced or am I presented with information that can actually change what I'm thinking? Yeah.
Yeah, and that is so true. Like, I noticed that a couple of weeks ago when all this started. I was in a state of panic and started watching the news and listening to discussions. And then, like, I realized that, oh my God, like, I am flooding myself with more information that is not helpful at this point. And so I did pull back and reduce the amount of exposure to news and other such discussions. But yeah, I also notice this amongst my friends and other clients that I have, that they end up being on the news cycle or watching their apps for investments and other things, which only increases their anxiety. I I actually thank my financial advisor who sent me a message saying, "Don't look at the markets for the next few months. We'll be doing what we want. We'll discuss with you, but you don't start looking at those." So that was great advice.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a perfect example of how technology can amplify stress, but also, I think most people are aware of this right now and I'm not going to say this is all news outlets or all YouTube channels or all podcasters, but a lot of people know that, conflict and extreme points of view attract attention and attract eyeballs and so on and so forth. So, each notification, each market update, it sort of creates this new cycle of stress activation in your body. And in the last couple of days, we've seen the markets, fall by double digit numbers, rise by double digit numbers, and then correct again. And these are very, very unusual movements, and it's only expected that they will lead to some serious questioning as to, hey, what's really going on over here? So yeah, I think that's great advice from your financial advisor. So yeah.
Totally agree. And then what happens is many of us try to cope in ways that might provide short term relief, but actually makes the situation worse. Like excessive screen time, I'm guilty of that, stress eating, or avoiding financial realities altogether. So either we are trying to, get more knowledge or totally checking out, which also is not advisable.
Right. I think striking that balance becomes difficult for a lot of people. But the good news is, there's a lot of research out there, and we're going to dive into some of that, which shows, how you can interrupt those negative cycles. And the key to understanding is really that while we can't control external events, we can certainly influence how our mind and our body is responding to those events. So the rest of this episode really is about what it is that you can do to regain that sense of control and focus on your locus of control, as they say. Yeah.
So, before we go further, I would like to offer a suggestion to all our listeners. As a coach, this is important for me. Listen for the tools and suggestions that we are giving here. Take them as experiments. Try them out with curiosity and adapt them to your specific situations. There is no one tool fits all. Every human being is different, so we need to be adaptable and also have that awareness of what we are trying and how it works for us. So be mindful of that. Let's begin with the first set of our tools, shifting how we relate to uncertainty and chaos is one of our first suggestions. Vivek, from your medical perspective, why is this mindset shift so important physiologically?
Yeah, great question. So, for our audience, internally, we call this, or generally it's referred to as a reframing technique, right? And it goes back to what I was describing as what we perceive as stress, right? So, when we perceive a situation as threatening and beyond our control, we perceive that as stress, and our body reacts in a stressful manner, right? But when we shift our perception, even just slightly, we can actually change how our nervous system responds to that particular situation.
Yeah, I call this acceptance without resignation. It's like acknowledging reality without giving up your agency. So, with the current economic situation, it might sound like markets are volatile right now, and that's concerning. I can't control that, but I can control how I respond and the steps I take to protect myself. I would actually like to quote Mark Carney, who is the liberal candidate here. He said, "We can't control Trump, but we can control how we respond and how we react to it. And that is a perfect example of, balancing the reality and accepting what it is and doing what you can.
Yeah, so reframing techniques are actually, they sound simple, but they're actually very powerful. And studies show that this sort of cognitive reframing can actually lower cortisol levels and reduce the physiological impact of stress.
Yeah, so let's give our listeners a practical exercise. The exercise that I'm going to talk about is something that I practiced, and it was suggested to me by a therapist when I was struggling with anxiety, and it's very, very useful. We call it the circle of control. Take a piece of paper and draw two circles in one concentric circles, one inside the other. In the inner circle, write down everything related to the current situation that you can control or actions you can take. In the outer circle, write what you are concerned about but can't control. And to all the listeners, if you do this exercise, tag us at Serapath. So we'd love to cheer you on or give you more tips to adapt it to yourself.
Right. So, and I think the idea over here is to focus your energy on that inner circle, right? And this isn't psychological advice. I want to make sure that people understand that it's neurobiological, right? It's not only in your mind. This is a mind-body solution, right? So when you're focusing on areas that you have agency over, what you're actually doing is you're activating your prefrontal cortex, which is, somewhere sort of over here. So over here, for those of you who are watching this on video, it's sort of this, forebrain area. And this is the rational planning part of your brain. It's very interesting. There's a group of neurons. They're called mirror neurons over here. So for those of you who are deeply interested in the neurobiology, just search for mirror neurons and prefrontal cortex, and you'll get a sense of what it is that we're really referring to over here. So the rational part and the planning part of your brain really takes over. And so rather than being stuck, driven by fear, anger, quote unquote, the amygdala, what you're doing is you're saying, oh, look, there's a particular situation and I'm going to respond to it with my prefrontal cortex rather than with my amygdala.
Yeah, and especially in times of anxiety, our emotional reaction is very high. So it's important to move from emotion to our more rational side. For example, you can't control whether a recession happens, but you can control doing something to counteract that, such as building an emergency fund, diversifying income streams, or cutting unnecessary expenses, or simply planning your finances in a much tighter fashion.
Yeah, no, for example, we've already had a conversation as a family where we've decided that we're going to be a little more mindful about our spending habits, a little bit more mindful about how much we're ordering out, Ubering deliveries, and so on and so forth. So, along with focusing on that sort of inner area of a control and getting your problem solving brain activated, another sort of important mindset shift, oh, that's a tongue twister, is zooming out and sort of taking a long view, right? So markets are cyclical, economies recover, and this isn't to minimize the current situation and minimize the hardship many of us are going to face, but it's to put them in context of historical context, and but also like, these types of events happen, and history has shown that we have a tendency to recover from these kinds of events.
Yeah, and to bring this point home of understanding how these things are cyclical, and all of us, have gone through phases of life where we face challenges and we have overcome them. We are here today listening to a new problem, trying to solve a new problem. So we have a lot of skills that we can use. And so what I like to do with my clients is to help them identify previous challenges that they have overcome. And the pandemic is a perfect example, right? When we went through it was as if our lives came to a standstill and we didn't know what was going to happen. But we are all here today, 5 years on. So I ask my clients to check in and ask themselves what strengths and resources they discovered during this time, and how can they use those strengths and resources that they used to overcome the previous challenge into the bring it into the current challenge, and how can they use that again and apply it to the current situation.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think what that does really is it sort of activates the memory networks associated with resilience. And you'll hear this is the biggest drop since COVID. This is the biggest drop since 2008. And I think what we're suggesting is, okay, yeah, that while that might be the case, how did you respond in 2008 and what are the lessons that you learned? Well, how did you respond in COVID? What are the lessons that you learned and how can you apply those in the current situation? So, you're activating different neural pathways. And again, it's coming back to what you can do to be in control rather than being fear driven. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very important that we look at our strengths. We have inner wisdom and strength because we've lived our life, and to tap into those strengths. So let's do a quick exercise for our listeners. Think of a previous challenge you faced and overcame. What personal strengths did you draw from that at that time when you were going through that challenge? Write them down. Then, next to that, just write what actions did you take? How did things eventually resolve? Like, what were the steps that you took to be here today facing a new challenge?
And reconnecting with those memories of resilience can actually change your physiological response to the current stressors. So the exercise is really designed to make sure that you are not responding. Let me rephrase that. The exercise is really designed to make sure that you're responding to the situation with all your cognitive resources available to you. So it's not just positive thinking. It's really creating a neurobiological blueprint for how to respond to the current situation.
And also reminding yourself that you have done this before, you have certain strengths that you can use in the current situation, because we forget how successful we have been when we are in an anxious state. So it's important to remind yourself of that.
All right. So that was about reframing and how you can use a positive mind shift to make sure that you're responding to a situation and with all the cognitive resources that you have. The next segment really, or the next tip maybe, is really about how to break the cycle of stress in your body, right? So even with the best mindset shifts, your body still needs to be able to physically process and release the stress. Is not biologically an accurate way of describing it, but it's what generally people will feel like. They're like, oh, I had the stress, it was built up, and I performed a particular activity or I did one thing and I was able to release the stress. So your body needs to be able to process the hormones that are pumping in your body. And we're going to be talking about how we go about doing that.
Yeah, this is very, very important, because just our mindset is not enough to take us through a crisis situation. Many people don't realize they are walking around with accumulated stress in their bodies, especially during prolonged uncertainty. And for me, I usually suggest my clients to become more aware of their body and the signals the body is sending to them. So grounding themselves in the body is really important at this time.
Exactly. And from a medical perspective, physical movement, sort of taking that one step further, right? So physical movement is one of the most effective ways to process stress hormones. And I'm going to use inverted commas when I'm saying process stress hormones. But what we're really doing is, A, we have these hormones roaming around. They're forcing us and making us think in a certain way. Physical exercise is actually the best way to sort of, consume those hormones and then set yourself back to baseline. So when your body is preparing for fight or flight, it is expecting some sort of physical action to follow. But, in our modern worlds, we often just sort of sit around and sort of worry and so on and so forth. So, going out, getting some form of physical activity going is the best way to quote unquote drain the body of those hormones. Yeah.
Yeah, and just simple movements, right? Even just 5 to 10 minutes of just getting up and moving can signal to your body that the stress response can be completed and turned off. So it's
Exactly. Research shows that even brief physical activity reduce cortisol levels and increase endorphins, right? So you don't need an intense workout, walking, stretching, or dancing around in your living room all counts. And I personally think living room dancing is an underappreciated strategy for managing acute stress exposure, by the way. I'm just sort of putting it out there. It's something that is this household is very adept at living room dancing. So yeah.
my favorite way to let's have fun while we are stressed out. I love recommending what I call stress release micro practices, short activities you can do throughout the day. For example, take 60 seconds every hour to stand up, shake your limbs, or take several deep breaths, just calm your system down.
Yeah, excellent advice. Deep breathing particularly activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your body's rest and digest mode. So, the opposite of flight and fight. And this really does counter the stress response. Another really good one for activating your parasympathetic nervous system is splashing your face with cold or icy water. I call this the James Bond approach to managing stress. So, whenever you see James Bond, or a movie and he's done something super stressful, you always see him taking a cold shower. So yeah, that's what he's doing. He's activating his parasympathetic nervous system. So yeah.
Yeah, so maybe put a picture of James Bond in front of you and remind yourself of cold water
Yeah,
splashing your face.
this might be a good
Yeah,
opportunity for our listeners to tag who they think the best Bond is. So
yeah, why not have fun with it? Which one did it best? Another powerful tool is what I call worry time. Schedule 15 to 20 minutes a day specifically for worrying about financial concerns or any other concerns that you have. Outside that time, remind yourself that you'll address those thoughts during your designated worry time. So that kind of keeps your thoughts in line and allows you to focus on other things.
right. So that's really a great example of, what would be referred to as containment, right? So from a neurobiological perspective, this is preventing stress from becoming the constant baseline. What it's doing is it's saying, I have this one moment or maybe two moments within the day where I'm going to allow myself to quote unquote worry and accept the fact that I'm going to be stressed out. But beyond that, I'm going to then return to baseline. So you're managing stress exposure and it's not becoming chronic. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's also talk about the role of sleep, which is often disrupted in some way during economic uncertainty. Poor sleep, as we all know, creates a vicious cycle where you have less resilience to handle stressors the next day. So, Vivek, go ahead, give us some ideas.
Right. So just to remind listeners, sleep is important because that's when your body is doing a whole bunch of background work that is essential for you to be able to function during the day, right? So you're consolidating learning, a lot of the repair and regeneration that happens in the human body is actually happening during sleep. And without adequate sleep, especially if cortisol levels remain elevated, your amygdala and the brain's alarm system is really just becoming more activated and more reactive, so to speak. Yeah. And I
Yeah, so
think,
Vivek,
yeah, sorry.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, go ahead.
No, I think so. I think the question that you had was, what are some practical steps that people can take to
Yes.
protect their sleep,
Yeah.
right? So I think the one that we advocate for a lot is to establish sort of like a news and screen curfew, right? So at least one, preferably 2 hours before bed, you're not exposing yourself to any devices, you're not exposing yourself to news. And there's a variety of reasons why this is useful, right? So the blue light from the screen is interfering with melatonin production. But also, if you're consuming stressful information, you're really just activating your stress response right before when you're trying to sleep. And obviously, that's not going to work. So,
Yeah, and something that has worked really well for me, and there's a lot of research suggesting this too, is to create a simple wind down routine that signals to your body it's time to relax. Maybe a cup of herbal tea, gentle stretching, or reading something light, or even listening to, music or something that is gentle and calming, so that it prepares you or your mind and body together to go and sleep in a little while.
Right. And I think one problem that a lot of us face is this, racing thoughts keeping you awake. And if this is the case, and by the way, this is something which, if you look at it from from what your body and your mind is telling you, what it's really saying is like, hey, these are the things that I think is important, and I don't think we've been able to really address them properly. So I'm going to bring them up for you, and you need to sort this out before you can chill and relax, right? So now the way to handle this, one of the ways at least, is what you would then refer to as the brain dump technique, right? So keep a notebook by your bed, write down whatever it is that's in your mind, whether it's a to-do, worries, ideas, whatever it is. Once you get it done on a piece of paper, this just helps your brain let go. And then it says, okay, I've done my job. I've alerted you. You now know what's going on. And now I can switch off and I can go back to sleep. So yeah, and you don't your sort of inner mind doesn't need to keep rehearsing this because it's already been documented down. So yeah.
This is really good because someone like me, especially on the neurodivergent spectrum, has this problem of racing thoughts. Like I cannot go to sleep with an unsolved problem. So this is really a good technique, and I can attest to it that it really works. So, Vivek, let's bring it all into perspective and create a more holistic approach to our stress that we are going through right now. We should talk about how nutrition plays into stress management during this kind of uncertainty. Many people either stress eat or lose their appetite completely. So, we should address those as well.
Yeah, look, this is very important, and it's a topic which is close to my sort of personal interests as well, both from a research perspective, but also I like food in general. Chronic stress and stress in particular impacts how we metabolize food. And if we're not careful, what that does is that it triggers an inflammatory response in the body. And once you have either a low grade inflammatory response or even an acute inflammatory response, it sort of sets the entire system off balance, right? And like you said, when you're responding to stress, you're often sort of driven towards what we would call comfort foods. They tend to be high in sugar and refined carbohydrates, and that creates a negative or a positive feedback cycle where, your hormones are fluctuating because of the high refined carbohydrates that you're consuming. You're going through these crashes and these valleys and peaks. And it's a cycle that sort of then keeps repeating itself.
Yeah, and in the moment, it might feel good or easy because sometimes it is also about, being stressed and trying something easy to access. But it can lead to blood sugar crashes that make anxiety worse. What nutritional approaches would you recommend, Vivek, during these high stress periods?
Right. So focusing on, stabilizing blood sugar with regular meals that combine protein, healthy fats, and complex or slow release carbohydrates. And this helps prevent the additional stress that comes from blood sugar spikes and those crashes.
Yeah, and staying hydrated, right? That is really important at this time. We sometimes forget that. I find many clients don't realize that even mild dehydration can amplify anxiety symptoms and fatigue. And personally, I have noticed that when I'm not aware of my hydration, it lowers my blood pressure and I can get dizzy and things like that. And I don't even realize how I got. So this is important to remember while we are stressed out.
Absolutely. And also be mindful of the amount of caffeine and alcohol that you're consuming. Many people will increase consumption of both during stressful times, but it's important to remember that they disrupt sleep and they will exacerbate anxiety.
Yeah, so let's give our listeners a simple nutritional framework for stressful times. I recommend the plate method. It works well for me. Fill half of your plate with colorful vegetables, quarter with lean protein, and a quarter with complex carbohydrates like whole grains or starchy vegetables.
That's right. And don't forget to include foods that are rich in magnesium, like leafy greens, nuts, and seeds. They not only help support the nervous system, but it's also really good for sleep. And then, of course, making sure that you're getting enough omega-3 fatty acids, which can be found in fatty fish, walnuts, flax seeds, good vegetarian sources. And all of this is a combination of anti-inflammatory, but also making sure that you're getting the amount of essential vitamins and minerals that help you process all the bodily functions as appropriately as you can. So yeah.
Yeah, and another practical tip that is very helpful is to prepare stress management snacks in advance. Like know that it's going to happen. You will be worried and you might want to reach quickly for something. Simple things like vegetables with hummus, yogurt with berries, or a handful of nuts. Having these ready makes you less likely to reach for processed foods when stress hits. Also, I have noticed something. We should be paying attention to our cravings. Say you notice you reaching for sugary treats, so that's a signal that your body is feeling something or experiencing something. So once you're aware, switch to making healthier choices like dark chocolate or a fruit. Your body is craving something for a reason. Support your body, support your cravings, but make healthier choices.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. And I think just remember that nutrition during stressful times isn't about perfection. It's really just about supporting your body's resilience. So small, consistent choices can make a big difference. All
Totally.
right. So I think that covers what we had planned for nutrition. But and this is a favorite topic of ours. We've done a previous podcast on this as well. But setting digital boundaries during stressful times, in particular, but in general, perhaps just creating digital boundaries for ourselves, right? So one of the key factors that is amplifying what's going on right now is really our constant connection with news and information. So what we're going to do is talk about creating healthy digital boundaries that can preserve your cognitive health, but also help you get through some of what you're experiencing right now.
Yeah, and this is really an important topic. It's important to stay connected, but the constant stream of market updates, economic predictions, and alarming headlines at this time keeps our stress response continuously activated.
Yeah. And think about it from an evolutionary slash neurobiological perspective, right? Our brains aren't designed to process this volume of threatening information constantly, right? So each negative headline can trigger a small stress response, and these micro stressful responses accumulate throughout the day. Our body is not designed to handle that.
Yeah, and this social media algorithms also tend to promote content that evokes strong emotional responses. So we should be really mindful about those headlines that we see. It promotes fear, anger, outrage. It's tapping into those emotions, which further intensifies our stress response.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting observation over here, which is, if you're being exposed to content that is triggering your amygdala, perhaps consider exposing yourself to content that triggers your prefrontal cortex rather than your amygdala. So I think that's just a general rule of thumb that perhaps people can think about. But studies show that even brief exposures of negative news can impact mood and anxiety levels for hours afterwards. So it's not just in that moment, but it's really affecting you for hours afterwards. And of course, during, times of economic uncertainty, there's really no shortage of concerning headlines.
Yeah, very true. I totally have experienced this in the recent days, so I can attest to how it affects. And Just because I had the awareness, I had to pull myself back. So, Vivek, let's discuss some practical boundaries that people can set, which is actually actionable in this time.
Yeah, so piggybacking on our previous concept and previous thoughts around containment, where we set up one or two periods throughout the day for quote unquote worry time. Here again, our recommendation generally tends to evolve around using that same principle, but also for worrying news, right? So, consider limiting news consumption to one or two specific times a day, ideally not the first thing in the morning and right before bed, right? Also, try and get your information from reputable sources rather than from social media or from headline notifications.
Yeah, I agree. I would also recommend what I call information fasting, just like my advisor suggested, designating certain times like the weekends or evenings as completely news free so that you get a chance to relax and rejuvenate. This gives your nervous system a break and a chance to reset.
Yeah, and just following the advice of your financial advisor, another boundary important to set, I think, would be just stop checking your financial statements and investment portfolios unless you're the one who's directly in charge of them, right?
Yeah.
And during market volatility, checking these portfolios multiple times a day really just intensifies the anxiety and it doesn't really provide any benefit. So if you're not the one who's making the day-to-day decisions, then make sure that you're not exposing yourself to information that you're not going to use for making any decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. For most long term investors, such as me, checking accounts once a week or even once a month is plenty. If needed, schedule a specific time for this rather than checking impulsively. So, just keeping your emotions in a more calm state.
Yeah. And if you're struggling with just you having the mental resilience to stop yourself from doing this, take advantage of some of the technology that you have
Yes.
access to, right? So apps that limit screen time, website blockers, or simply turning off notifications from news and financial apps. I've created a system for myself where I have this quasi do not disturb or a focus mode where apps, I can just flag those apps which I don't want to send me notifications during focus mode time. So something to think about.
Yeah, another interesting thing that I've noticed since I've been using meditation videos on YouTube, like when at the designated time every night, I listen to some meditation video. And I noticed that YouTube, after that triggered time, automatically starts suggesting those videos more on my feed. So even if I'm watching like something else before that, since I've made it a practice at a certain time to listen to meditation videos, it starts suggesting and putting it on the top of my recommended videos. And I was really surprised. And that's a really handy tool, right? To create a habit so that the algorithm starts suggesting things automatically at the right time. So that is using the technology that we have. Another technique I teach clients is a designated device approach. If possible, keep work and financial activities on one device, use another for relaxation and connection. This creates a psychological separation between stress inducing and restorative activities. So, for example, for me, my work and news and other things that I need to do every day is on my laptop and a monitor screen. And I have YouTube installed on my TV so that if I'm watching news or YouTube videos for entertainment, I watch it there. So there is a separation between work stress and my regular entertainment, and it triggers the entertainment area, kind of thing to me when I'm on my TV. So
Yeah, it's complete sense. Yeah. Our brains, form associations with different contexts. So this is really a spatial separation that can help reduce the spillover from either work or financial anxiety in this particular case into other areas of life. So yeah, absolutely.
So now let's also talk about how social connections can buffer against financial stress or any stress, right? This is often very overlooked, but is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. From a physiological perspective, positive social interaction actually reduces cortisol levels and it releases and it triggers the release of oxytocin, right? Think of oxytocin as a bonding hormone, and it counteracts the effects of cortisol and stress.
Yeah, but many people withdraw socially when facing financial concerns, either from embarrassment, lack of energy, or feeling like they need to focus on solving their problems.
which
So,
sort of
what do you
ironically
suggest?
removes them which sort of
No, no.
ironically removes them from their most powerful coping resources, right? So research consistently shows that social support is one of the strongest predictors of resilience during challenging times.
Yeah, so what are some ways that people can maintain and strengthen social connections during this kind of economic uncertainty?
Our advice is sort of, be selective, but be intentional, right? So you don't
Yes.
need a large social network, but you really just need one or two, maybe, three or four perhaps, really, but really one or two trusted relationships where you can share your concerns honestly and that in itself makes a significant difference. So, you know, whether it's your partner, your husband, your wife, your parents, your children, these tend to be, or maybe it's a best friend, these tend to be the people that we rely on whenever, we want to discuss things. So make sure that those relationships are available to you so that you can have those honest conversations.
Yeah. And I also often recommend what I call stress conscious socializing, choosing activities that don't strain your finances but still allow for meaningful connection. This might be a walk with a friend, a potluck dinner instead of going out, or a virtual coffee chat. Like, remember during the pandemics when families or friends were having Zoom calls and coffee chats? So that's available at no cost at all.
Yeah, and remember, just contributing to others actually also has stress reducing benefits as well. So if you like to volunteer, or volunteer work, or simply just helping a friend out or a neighbor activates these reward pathways in the brain as well, and that has a powerful effect of countering stress too. Yeah.
Yeah, in the coaching world, we talk about using kindness as a tool. So this is a very powerful, tool to change your mood. When you are stressed out, just do a kind act, just smile at someone who's struggling and helping them out. Actually really helps shift your own mood because you feel good about yourself.
That's right. So just
And
one thing over here,
yeah,
okay to be selective about who you discuss financial concerns with, because some
yes.
relationship might rather amplify rather than reduce the stress.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like stress contagion relationships where anxiety gets amplified through conversations. And this is something we should be mindful about during a politically or an economically charged time because everybody has different ideas and sometimes people will get into arguments and project their fears outward. So it's perfectly fine to set boundaries around these kinds of discussions with certain people.
And I think lastly, consider seeking specialized support when needed, right? So whether it's financial advisors or therapists who specialize in a particular topic or financial anxiety, or support groups or people who are experiencing similar challenges, all of these avenues can really provide targeted help. So don't feel shy or don't feel ashamed to get the help that you need if you feel that you have a lack of those resources to be able to manage the situation.
Remember that asking for support, whether emotional, practical, or professional, isn't a sign of weakness. It's actually a powerful stress management strategy.
Yep. All right. So I think we're going to wrap up with one of perhaps Sarika, your favorite toolkit over here, which is action planning, and then we'll just wrap up the episode. So as we wrap up, we're going to help you, our listeners, create a personalized action plan for managing chronic stress in particular, or just any stressful situation?
Yeah. And this is my forte. Like, this is what I enjoy the most because knowledge and knowing is not enough. Taking action and doing something about it is the most important thing. So, start small. Choose just 2 or 3 strategies from today's episode that resonated most with you rather than trying to implement everything at once.
And
And
remember,
then,
consistency. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
no, I'm done.
Yeah, and just remember that consistency matters the most, right? So
Yes.
it's not intensity, it's consistency that matters, and brief daily practices will be more effective than an occasional big effort.
Yeah, a simple framework that I use with my clients is one mindset shift you want to practice. Pick one physical stress reduction technique you'll implement daily. Pick another one boundary you'll set with media or technology, and one way you'll strengthen your supportive connections. All 4 things together creates a holistic plan.
Right. And so here, I think let's perhaps provide a specific example, right? So, one mind shift that we want to practice, and I think so for myself, what I'm going to do is rather than just listen to, say, US news outlets, I'm going to try and get a balanced perspective by listening to other news outlets as well. So, whether it be European news or Canadian news, or for that matter, a news out of Asia, that will help kind of balance out this one-sided perspective that I'm always getting. So that's the one mindset shift that I'm going to make.
Yeah, and the other one is to also, there could be, for me, what is working is what is in my control right now. Having the 2 circles is what I am doing for myself because otherwise it's been difficult. So
All right.
yeah, choosing which one works for you and what you can do consistently is important.
Okay. So one of the physical stress reduction techniques that I'm going to try and implement daily is I'm just going to take the dog out for rather than taking once a day, maybe twice a day. And I've actually started doing this over the last couple of days, which is in the afternoons or evenings, I'll take Mila out for a walk. I grab 2 oranges with me and I just roam around the block for like 10-15 minutes, peeling and eating the oranges. So I've actually started really enjoying that. So I'm going to continue doing that.
Oh, for me, what I did was started on a YouTube channel. I'm taking dance lessons. So every day, like for an hour, I take some dance lessons just to have fun and release the stress.
Nice, nice. All right. So one media or technology boundary that we want to set. I've started doing this, which is I'm only reading 1 or 2 hours before going to sleep. I'm not consuming any news media at all.
So for me, it's like I said, I do an hour just before going to sleep, like an hour before I start watching only meditation techniques or breathing techniques kind of video on my TV that or some podcasts that are fun, kind of cooking shows or something that they are fun yet not triggering any kind of response from me. So that kind of allows me to wind down and separate from everything.
Nice. One way that we'll strengthen supportive connections. So I think what I'm going to do is take my wife out for more date nights over the next couple of weeks. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going out for dinner. Maybe it's a movie, maybe it's going out for a walk, maybe it's going to the park, so on and so forth. So I think that's something that I'm going to do.
Yeah, intentionally doing something for connection is important. For me, I don't like phone calls a lot, but what I'm doing is making sure I'm checking in with my friends on a weekly basis. I have to make an effort to do that, which is good because that brings my awareness to other people rather than just me and worrying about myself. So that I am making an intentional effort about that.
Okay, so we've selected, a few things that we want to implement in our action plan. And then one of the parts of our action plan, obviously, is that we need to monitor our progress, right? So
Yeah.
the intent over here is to notice how these changes are affecting not just your stress levels, but also your sleep, energy, focus, and overall well being.
Yeah, it's also important to acknowledge that economic stress often reflects real challenges that need practical solutions. These stress management strategies aren't about ignoring financial realities, they are about creating the mental space and resilience to address them effectively.
Exactly. Managing your stress response puts you in a better position to make sound financial decisions, seek appropriate resources, and take constructive action.
Yeah, before we close, let's remind our listeners that navigating uncertainty is a skill that develops with practice. Each challenge builds capacity for future resilience.
And remember that while we can't control the broader economic environment, we have significant influence of our internal environment, our thoughts, our physical state, and the daily choices that we make. All right, so our producer has just told us that we've received some audience questions, and so we're going to see what we can do and answer those to the best of our abilities. This is a segment that both Sarika and I enjoy doing, so hopefully you'll be able to learn something, and perhaps your question is being answered. So the first one, do watching movies also trigger stress? From a doctor's perspective, does watching horror films increase my stress response? This is a good question, and I am sorry to say that I'm going to give you that diplomatic answer, which is like it kind of depends, right? So what does it really depend on? I think that's what is most important, which is if one is able to, so categorically, yes, it is going to trigger your stress response because these are images and experiences that are not necessarily normal. And so when you're dealing with information that is not normal, you are automatically going to be in a heightened sense of awareness. The second part is, whether you actually feel that you have the resources to be able to address this particular exposure or not. Now, a horror movie is, I mean, there's a wide range of horror movies, but if I were to take, first of all, I actually don't watch horror movies, so I'm actually probably not the right person to answer the question on the range of horror movies. But imagining if we were to take a range of horror movies and how we would be responding to them from a physiological perspective, the range would be across the spectrum of, am I expecting this to be a part of the horror movie, or am I being exposed to something which is completely beyond what I am used to experiencing? And the more unusual and the more quote unquote horrific it is, the more you're going to be experiencing stress. But I think the second part of this question, which may not necessarily be obvious, is, should we really be exposing ourselves to stressful situation when we're already in another stressful situation? And the answer is no, right? So what you want to do is you want to give yourself the ability to return to baseline rather than exposing yourself to more stressful situations because your body is simply not able to return to baseline. So hopefully that gives you a sense of whether you should be watching horror movies right now or not. So, all right. Second question. Does reading books trigger any specific response in the brain when I'm feeling stressed? Sarika, do you want to take this one? And I know that you are an avid book reader. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel what kind of books you're reading is important. If you are extremely stressed out and you're reading a thriller or something that is also creating that kind of excitement, I think we are overstressing ourselves at this point. To what I know from experience is when I'm stressed, I want to escape into something that takes me away from the reality. So I would suggest reading calmer or happier context in the book is better at this time. But Vivek, what happens to the brain? You are better at addressing this.
Yeah, I think about it this way. Coming back to that question about horror movies. I mean, horror
Yeah.
movies, you're visually, audially stimulated, whereas when you're just reading a book, it's the stimulation level is a little less, right? So if I think the main thing is that, if you're reading for relaxation, you're reading a topic that you inherently don't find stressful, right? So
Yes.
am I going to be reading Terry Pratchett versus some sort of a World War II book? I mean, it kind of depends, right? So I probably prefer Terry Pratchett, but there could be some people who are, reading World War II books as well. But choose what you find enjoyable. And if the option is, should I read a book or watch a horror movie? I mean, I would suggest reading a book. So
And to your point, I am like a person who enjoys Robert Ludlum or Dan Brown, like thriller kind of books that really takes me out of the current situation and gives me something to focus on. So, yes, that helps. But notice, I would suggest that become more aware of how your body is responding to this. If you find you're getting more stress, losing sleep, or having difficulty focusing on anything else, then maybe that is not the right book for you right now. Maybe select a calmer topic or an interesting topic. Sometimes people find learning something new is much better when we are stressed, because that allows our prefrontal cortex to be activated. We are learning something new, a skill or science or something that actually helps us become more focused in planning and solving our issues rather than getting into an emotion and having an emotional response. So that is just a suggestion, becoming more aware.
yeah, I think it's a great one. All right, moving to the next question. Is burnout just a me problem, or is my brain literally not built to handle nonstop notifications and hustle culture? I think you've answered your question there itself. So, first of all, no, it's not a me problem. Let's be categorical. Burnout is a me responding to my environment problem, and the environment having too much demands on me a problem, right? Your brain is not built to handle nonstop notification, and hustle culture is a figment of our imagination. I'm going to just put
Yes.
it out there, right? It's it's something that is pervasive within the startup culture. It's something that
Yes.
people, investors in particular, are out there for. And what investors are looking out for in entrepreneurs is what they call a blue flame, right? A blue flame is a person who is going to burn themselves in the most productive way so that they can be the most efficient. They don't really care what happens to you afterwards, right? So you, as a person who's being exposed to this, or if you're in entrepreneurship yourself, you want to build resilience, and you want to think about the long term, about what it is that you need to do to be able to develop the tools that you have so that you can look after yourself and look after the people who are relying on you as a leader, right? So yeah, burnout is
Uh,
not a me problem. And yes, your brain is not built to handle nonstop notifications, and hustle culture is toxic. So avoid it. Don't be beholden to what you might sometimes be exposed to.
I want to add in here, since both of us, Vivek and I, are entrepreneurs, so we have gone through this kind of pressure where that's what we've heard from others. I would suggest that, know what your limitations are, understand what your skills and strengths are, address your weaknesses. It is very important to be aware of both, and don't do everything yourself. Invest in someone or something that can help you with reducing your burnout so that you can last long enough to take this forward and make it a real success than being burnt out.
One of and just sort of just to add to this, the way that we have constructed an action plan, which is, hey, these are several strategies that one can deploy, and this is the action plan, and make sure that you're measuring your progress, is really the same toolkit that you need to avoid overexposure slash hustle culture, right? So
Yeah.
we're not saying that don't go out there and do what it is that you think you need to do. What we're saying is that if there isn't a framework around or a strategy around what you're using to achieve and get to your goals, and all you're doing is being exposed to demands without any sense of what's going on, then that is what should be avoided, right? So if your boss is just continually making demands on you and you have no idea what the strategy behind that is, then you need to, they may also not know what they're doing. And so you need to think about why you're working over there and so on and so forth. So generally, if you have a good plan, you have an action plan, you're measuring success, you understand what the risks are, you've created a risk mitigation strategy, and you understand how to pivot. Those are tools that are going to help you avoid burnout and not get stuck in this fake toxic hustle culture. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So this is a question, and I think it's probably related to our previous podcast. But if my brain is addicted to quick dopamine from reels and doom scrolling, how long does it take to reset? Like, are we talking days or months? And is the damage reversible? So I think if you have, half an hour, 45 minutes, listen to our previous podcast, and we go into quite a bit as to what's going on over here. Really think about it this way. First of all, I think the first thing is it reversible? Yeah, I don't like to use the word damage, so I wouldn't say that's what's happened over here. I think there's a habituation that has taken place, and clearly this individual feels that there's a problem over here. So to answer your question directly, yes, it's reversible. How long does it take? It depends on what you're going to do to help yourself out of the situation. But really, it's a matter of weeks to a few months, and it's certainly not permanent. So yeah, the reset it's possible, and it takes weeks to months and not sort of months to years. Sarika, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would like to add in here for someone who's been through, clinical depression and overcome anxiety and depression and got out of taking medication. The thing is, the more severe your problem is, the longer it takes for you to get better. That is the first thing. The second thing is what you put into it, right? If you want to overcome something, it takes time and a practice to change your mindset. So it doesn't mean that if today you've broken the habit of doom scrolling or being on your device, it's done. It never goes away. It's there with you, and it's an everyday awareness that helps you stay away from something that was damaging to you, whether this is an addiction to something, whether it is mental health issues like depression or anxiety, or whether it is an eating habit. Any of these requires daily effort, being patient with yourself. It takes time for the mind and body to get on track, and just enjoy that and celebrate everyday success that you are getting. It's important.
Awesome. So I think with those words of compassion, and this is compassion directed to the self, we'll end. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward for you to join us for the next episode.
Bye for now.
Bye.